Still time for the Marlins to do something, but we're going to look at the roster as is heading into 2024. Who's going to make it? Who's not going to make it? Tons to get into. This is Locked On Marlins.
You are Locked On Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings from England and welcome to Locked On Marlins. This is your daily Marlins podcast. I'm your host, Peter Pratt. Hit me up on X at Miami Marlins _UK. If you listen to the pod, of course, hit subscribe. This is your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Marlins your first listen. There is a YouTube channel, of course. Make sure you hit subscribe over there too. If you are watching, you will see we have a guest in the house. Chase is joining me. He's looking cold. He's looking colder than me. Chase, Merry Christmas. New Year on the horizon. How we doing, brother?
Doing all right, man. Happy holidays. It's a little bit chilly down here in South Florida for those of us. It's 67 degrees Fahrenheit, which in your terms is 19.44 degrees Celsius. So probably hot for you, cold for us. Happy to be here because we're going to have a steaming hot episode today.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, just FYI, that temperature is about how hot it gets like midsummer in Leeds. So just to call that out. But yeah, plenty to get into here, mate. And really this whole episode and maybe the one after is going to be fully dedicated to looking at FanGraphs roster resource and their consideration of who's going to be on this opening day roster, effectively who's on the 40-man now and who's going to need to be on this roster. So we're going to work through some positions we'll spend more time on than others, where there may be some kind of no-brainer situations where these guys are definitely going to make it. So we'll spend most of the time considering who are the fringe guys who may need to be upgraded potentially, and who equally could be DFA'd. We shouldn't rule that out as well, or traded. So tons to get into here. Before we do that, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and you can make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And Chase, we are starting at the catcher position. The Marlins, right now, they have two catchers on the 40-man. So both of them projected to be on the opening day roster. Nick Fortes and the recently acquired Bethancourt. Peter Bendix was alluding to the fact that the Marlins were looking to add multiple catchers, like just add as many as they can. They haven't quite gotten there yet. I'm interested to see about this Joey Bart situation in San Francisco, I must say. However, Chase, Fortes, Bethancourt, in your opinion, are both of these on the opening day roster? Are neither of them on the opening day roster? Is it just one of them? How do you see this playing out at catcher? I do think, based on what Peter Bendix has shared, this could be an area that could flux from now to opening day. What about you?
I mean, we could go the easy way here and say at least one of the two will be on the opening day roster. Right?
Which one?
Just which one? You saw Fortes kind of go backwards as far as the hitting was concerned last season. The guy can play defense as far as blocking. He'd be a great goalie in hockey, but he didn't really do too well throwing people out. That was a weakness in both our catchers last season. This season, they're bringing in Bethancourt. He's known by Bendix, former Tampa Bay Ray. Marlins probably try to pick him off waivers. Unfortunately, the Guardians got him instead, ended up trading for him. Was it cash considerations or something small like that? But I don't see Bethancourt not on this roster. Fortes does still have some minor league options if needed. But honestly, I don't see them bringing anyone else. They have no room. The 40-man roster's packed, and I see both of them on the roster, at least to start.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think if Peter Bendix hadn't said we're going to add multiple catches, and he still may, I think this is maybe it where, considering Bethancourt is an arbitration, for me and Sean Barrett covered this in depth at the time, the view was you're requiring this guy, you're going to have to pay him $2 million, whatever it might be, through arbitration. To me, and there's no minor league options. That's the indication. Bethancourt's making this roster. The question is, does Nick Fortes, in my opinion, Nick Fortes should absolutely be making this roster. The defense improved. The stick went backwards. We need to see the stick take another step forward. And so for me, I think this is the catching tandem for the Marlins heading into the 2024 season at this point. I think they will add some catchers, but they may be minor league guys that go down to AAA and add some depth. Like I said, the other thing, kind of eye emoji situation, is the Joey Bart situation. Had a terrible major league career effectively with the Giants, but he is not going to make that roster. They have got two catchers they like. Bart is not one of them. No minor league options for Joey Bart. And so for me, he will be traded in some fashion to someone. And like I said, the Marlins have already put their stake in the ground to say, we're looking for catchers. They could get Bart. Just to finish up on this, Chase, they could get him, add him to the roster and think, you know what, give the flexibility. We'll have to send Fortes down at this point. Could they even go down that pathway where they go and get Bart, they have Bethancourt, and then they option Fortes to start the year?
I can see. I like Bart. First off, I think the new place would be great for a familiar face. I think we were trying to get him years ago before he was on that San Francisco, before he made his major league debut. We were trying to work out a trade for him way back when. I could see him being on this roster, an invite at least to spring training, and then battle it out. I guess he has to have a 40-man roster position. He has no minor league options, as you said, but Fortes does. So, you have 3 men in there and let the best person win. Yeah.
We'll wait and see. I think it's an intriguing position. Let's move over to first base. The only first baseman projected to be on, traditional or typical first baseman, is Josh Bell. Final year of his deal. Roster Resource has no other first baseman on the roster. Let's start with Josh Bell. $16.5 million, I think the number was. Big number. It's a big number for the Marlins anyway. However, the impact that Josh Bell made at the back end of the year, for me, huge impact, big-time player. I know it's a lot of money in the grand scheme when your budget's around about $100 million for $16.5 for Bell. However, Josh Bell, the only other consideration here is the Marlins look to trade him to save some money, but I can't see that personally at this stage. What about you?
I'm in agreement. Bell will be on this roster. You made the playoffs last season. They need to have some major league talent who can hit some home runs. He's one of them. With Soler gone, you have kind of freed that money, give or take. Remember, you and I discussed earlier, and people could go back to the Locked On Marlins podcast on YouTube or listen to the previous episodes we've been on. However, we've discussed that he opted in minus Segura. You're really eating only like $7 million for him as a first baseman, and that's a pretty good deal. So he'll be here.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the impact, the 1-year deal, if things are going sideways, they can obviously trade him at the deadline and recoup some of that value back and save some money too at the back end if they need to. But let's hope that isn't the case. Let's hope they're buying again at the deadline. So moving on to second base, Luis Arias at this point is slated to be leading off and starting at second base. There's been some discourse around the Marlins looking to move and restock the farm. And to restock the farm, you have to probably trade away one of your big chips. Do you expect that Luis Arias is traded at all in 2024?
No, he'll be a Marlin. He'll be a Marlin until at least the final season of his contract, till at least mid-season. He just won the batting title. They're going to do what they did with Sandy, promote the heck out of that, get people into the stands as best possible with giveaways, bobbleheads, and awards for him. He'll be here next season.
What about an extension? Just briefly on extension opportunity here with Arias. Like, could we see that playing out sometime in 2024?
I hope he's here for the next 5-6 years. Listen, it's all, we don't know, right? It's the unknown with this new leadership. If you look at Bendix's history, he did offer younger players extensions. I don't know if they were $9+ million like Arias would be promised at this point, but we'll see what happens. But we hope so.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a really interesting year in many ways for Luis Arias. Both, can he follow it up, which he's already proven he can follow it up. The question is he going to play second base? I think that's another interesting wrinkle here. How do they, let's kind of talk about that briefly. If you've got Josh Bell at first base, And you've got Bruhan on the roster that has to be on the roster. The Marlins seemingly like Xavier Edwards too. They like John Birdie too. There's a lot of middle infield guys. Could you see them going with just one out-and-out pure first baseman and Josh Bell, and then maybe Luis Arias becomes that kind of, the backup, the de facto backup first baseman for the Marlins in 24?
We hope that Troy Johnson gets a chance in the majors. However, if we're talking about the roster as constructed right now for opening day, Luis Arias is your backup first. We saw him play it a few times towards the end of last season. I believe if we weren't in contention, we would have seen him more or less at first base. Of course, those injuries to his ankle and whatnot had some effect there too. But yeah, he's the backup first baseman. The real battle is for shortstop, which we'll probably get into later in the second.
We're going to get into that. We're going to get into that straight after the ad, actually. It's good to mention Troy Johnson. For me, spring training is going to be very interesting for Troy Johnston. I think as well, I'm interested to see, do the Marlins bring another vet in like a Yuli Gurriel from last year? Do they just look to do that? I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
If you look to 3 years ago, I'm going back to 2021. All right. We had our second baseman. It wasn't Jazz at the time. I'm forgetting who was our starter back, who's projected to be our starter. Whoever it was, he got beat flat out by Jazz in spring training.
Yeah, it was Isan.
Isan. Yeah, Isan. Yes. Jazz beat him right out. You couldn't say no to Jazz. You couldn't keep him off this roster at that time. If Troy Johnston has a spring like that, he will be your backup first baseman. And I hope he is. He's going to be cheap for a long time. We're lucky we got to keep him. He wasn't taken as many projected he may have been in the draft a couple weeks ago and whatnot. But happy to have him and hope he makes it up here. We'll see.
Yeah, big spring. But the Marlins have full flexibility there. I think that's the interesting thing is they didn't add him to the 40-man. No one took him in the Rule 5. Effectively, at any point, they can add him to the 40-man when, if required. It may be before the year, maybe before the season. He may make the roster. Who knows? But they have flexibility now on that.
Injuries happen throughout the season. It's nice to have him as if he doesn't make the team in a backup sort of plan. But we'll see, right? Injuries happen. He'll be on this roster at some point next season, no doubt.
Yeah, I think he will. I think you're right. I think we will see him. I'm not sure it'll be opening day, but we'll see. We'll see how the roster's constructed. Let's do our first ad of the day, and then we'll carry on the conversation. Really want to get into shortstop, which I think is very interesting. But this episode is brought to you by our good friends, of course, at FanDuel. And as the weather gets colder, the NFL stays hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, this is the time. There is no better time to get on the action. So much happening right now. The app, it's super easy to use and it has all of your betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, guys, you're back here with me, Peter Pratt, and Chase on Friday, the 29th of December. We are going through the Marlins' projected opening day roster, working out who's going to be here, who isn't, what decisions need to be made. We've already covered catcher. Gut feel. Maybe the catching position is already set. First base feels set. Who's backing up? Maybe Arias. Does Johnson make a push in spring? Wait to see. Second base, locked in with Luis Arias. Let's move it over to shortstop, because for me, this is the most intriguing spot right now via roster resource anyway. We have John Birdie at shortstop for opening day. However, on the roster, or the opening day roster anyway, Vidal Brujan and Xavier Edwards. So you've got 3 guys there, all projected to make this roster. We know with John Birdie, we know the way the Marlins have used him. They've never seen him as a one-position specific everyday player. John Birdie's value is moving around the diamond. Do we just started with Birdie? Do we expect a similar role for him, or can we see a role change perhaps this year where they actually ask of him more in a single position? Where's your head at on that one?
In the history of John Birdie, he kind of wears out when he plays for too long at a time. Over the last couple seasons, there's been a lot of injuries to Wendell, to Rojas, a couple years ago with the fingers injuries and whatnot on his hand. And and Birdie had to take a significant role at short. He was great for the first couple days, maybe first week, but going to the 10th straight game, even with the day off in there, he's just he wears out. He's not the future at shortstop. Is he a placeholder? Maybe. I personally would rather see Xavier Edwards given the shot to grow in the role, being that he was a hit machine last season for both minors and when he came up to the majors. I'm not familiar too much with Brujan. I don't think he has taken advantage of the opportunities with Tampa, but they also had Wander Franco at the time. So there was really very little wiggle room for him to play at short.
Yeah,
I'd like to see
agreed.
a nice competition in spring. Anybody's better than Joey Wendell, and we hope good luck to him in New York. But with the three we have, maybe they piece it together. The off season's not over. You still have Tim Anderson out there, and the longer you hear nothing about him, the more I see a team like the Marlins get him on a low cost contract with a team friendly opt-in for the second year. But that's not part of this conversation. Birdie, he needs to stay at a super utility. He's not an everyday.
I think you bring up a great point, just speaking about guys outside the organization. So let me ask you this one. From a shortstop perspective, considering, and I think we're all in agreement, it feels, with John Birdie, his value is super util. That is where he delivers the most value. And let's keep him in that role. The question then comes down to, how do the Marlins feel about Brujan? No options on him, by the way. So he's making this roster or is being DFA'd. And Xavier Edwards. And I think we know how they feel about him in some ways, offensively. Defensively, there's some question marks, to be honest with you. So with that all being said, from a shortstop perspective, and considering the reports that Craig Mish put out there, that actually the Marlins were in on Isaiah Falefa, that to me suggests that the Marlins are looking to bring in someone at shortstop and bring someone from outside the organization in. Who that person is and how they do it, whether it's Tim Anderson via free agency or whether it's via a trade, we'll wait and see. But the Marlins were active in conversations with IKF. Couldn't make it happen. Dollars couldn't work. So gut feel here, Chase. Do you think the starting shortstop for the Marlins, for opening day anyway, is currently not on the roster?
I think he is on the roster. It's between those three guys. Two of them have to be on this roster. And you usually don't have two utility guys just sitting there on the bench wasting a spot. I'm kind of happy they didn't get Falafel on this team.
Me too.
You made a trade last season with the old regime and Kim Ng, and you brought in Jacob Amaya. He has to be the future. You don't waste a guy like Miguel Rojas, send him over to the Dodgers to bring a guy in not to play with him in 3 years. So they need a short-term solution, whether that's pieced together or maybe X surprises us and is doing his workouts to earn that role. Again, we'll see what happens in spring.
Yeah, I think I did see a report, actually. I can't remember the source, so apologies for that. I don't have it in front of me. But the report was from Xavier Edwards. It may have been on the Hot Stove Show, thinking about it, with Kyle Seelaff. It feels like this offseason's just dragged for like 7 years, to be honest with you. But Xavier Edwards, from my recollection, was saying that he had a bit of a shoulder issue last year and really restricted his throwing. And actually, he's feeling good now. And the expectation is like the arm strength is going to kind of be there at full go, which again, to your point, I heard Skip Schumacher speak about it during the year. The question with Xavier Edwards is, can the defense play on the left side of the infield? Like, can he find a role at shortstop or third base effective? I think was where Skip's head was at. Xavier Edwards is kind of suggesting the same. The stick looks right. The stick looks like the right type of stick and will play. And so the question with him is, can the defense play? And to your point, I feel like the Marlins want to give him every opportunity. And then Brujan he has to also make the roster. You end up with, Brujan moving around a little bit too. Maybe dropping into second base when the Rise is sliding over to first. It's all this versatility that's required. But for me, if you would say to me, Pete, who's going to get the most reps at shortstop right now, next year, my gut feel would be Xavier Edwards, to be honest with you. Closely followed by Birdie, I must say. I think it'd be close between the guys. But that's my gut feel. What about Bruhan, though? Because for me, he feels like a real wild card. I spoke about him a lot on yesterday's show, primarily because he's stealing bases for fun in the Winter League at the moment. I think he's had 160 plate appearances, and he's stolen, it's over 25 bags, something in that range. So, he could be dynamite for the Marlins, exactly what they needed. So what do you kind of see in his outlook at this point for Bruhan?
He's either going to make the roster and have a role at second and short, or not, right? They're not just going to have him to not play. There's too little bit of roster room. Of course, you get the extra one player for the first week or so of the year. But again, it all comes down to the spring. I think the fan base is more or less rooting for Xavier Edwards. I know I'm stacking up on his signed autograph cards on eBay.
There you go. That's the indication.
I've become a big fan of him. That cost keeps going up and up, which stinks for me, for whoever's earning it. But I think we're all rooting for him because he made an impression on this fan base. Then you got the other fans who say our center fielder should be playing shortstop, being he's been there before. But he's not in this discussion. He could be in a back end if needed, like an emergency situation. Bruhan is the odd man out of the three. But how much does Bendix believe in him? That was the first Bendix trade. He didn't get him just to get him. I like the guy. He got him because he believes. Me and you talked about that little computer, right? Where on that spreadsheet did he go in the yellow, probably the higher yellows into the greens of being able to help this team from an analytic statistic level? Yes, he had a great winter league, but that doesn't always transfer from the Dominican League over to the majors. We'll see. Again, he has the opportunity. They all do. That's the good thing here. They have a little, as long as there's no one that's brought in, they have a good opportunity to earn the job.
Yeah, we'll see. I think you make a really good point, though, that, Bruhan, it's the most sizable transaction thus far of Peter Bendix's tenure, and he knows him. And again, for me, with the zero option situation, it's another indication. You look at the Bethancourt deal and you go, they're not going to acquire this guy and reach a $2.5 million number in arbitration to then have not make the team. He's going to make the team. And I feel like Bruhan's going to make the team too. And the question then is, if the Marlins find someone externally and they go and trade for someone or they bring in a free agent, for me, it's more likely, I would say, that Xavier Edwards is the one that gets optioned down because they have the flexibility with Xavier Edwards and there may not be an obvious role for him. So I think it's really interesting. I could see them rolling with the current guys. To be honest with you, there's a couple of guys in the outfield we're going to talk about shortly, but for me, I could absolutely see the Marlins just kind of calling it an off season, which we need to talk about the DH spot. There's an obvious issue at DH and we'll talk about that, but the infield, I could see them rolling with it, to be honest with you.
I could see it too. And, I've said it on X, Twitter, a few times. I keep getting backlash for anything I say there, which is fine. But I'm not talking as a fan anymore. I'm talking from a business level. I'm kind of taking more of that stance, watching what they're doing. They spent this offseason building the front office. This was not we're coming off playoffs. Maybe we'll make it next year. They're building something different for the future. And it's not a fire sale where you're getting rid of everybody, building the farm system again. They're not doing that, at least not yet, not so far. I could even see Birdie be traded, to be honest. He has a friendly deal. He's on a 1-year deal because this was the second-year option. And then next year, I don't know if he's still in arbitration. I got to look into it if he may be a free agent or how many more years of control they have over him. However, he could be a trade piece to bring something else in. It all comes to spring, right? If Xavier Edwards spent the offseason and Bruhan spent the offseason trying to play better, to compete, to earn a spot. How many the same players do you need on the team?
Yeah.
If they all prove something, well, great. It's like a Dane Douglas situation to me. Pokey Reese left the team. You weren't a fan back then, but Pokey Reese just decided to walk away from baseball in the middle of the spring training. Dan Ugla comes in. No one's heard of him before. He was a Rule 5 guy. Makes a difference. I hope one of these two players do the same.
I mean, you mentioned it as well. Like, the other thing we shouldn't forget is the guys that have spent a whole year in AAA. You mentioned one like Jacob Amaya. For me, it was one of the most kind of surprising, probably overrating it a touch, but like I was disappointed with his season more than most, I would say, in terms of like what he delivered at AAA. Unfortunately for him, it felt like he had things rolling. The Marlins brought him up. He played one game. They sent it back down. He never kind of found it again, unfortunately, for Jacob Amaya. But, for us to be sitting here and there's 3 guys already on the roster, plus Jacob Amaya, plus Jordan Groshans, we shouldn't forget about him. Like, they had so many of these dudes, and the Marlins are still going after Isaiah kind of Falefa. And for me, that's a really bad indicator of where these guys are at. And they've all got deficiencies. Primarily, the ones that can hit at the moment don't look like they can play shortstop. And that's primarily Xavier Edwards. We'll wait and see. The ones that can field and play the defense, they haven't got the big league stick. And for an offense that is, the worst in the NL, it was the worst in the NL last year and has got even worse to this point. They need all the offense they can get at this point, right?
You just said it. You see who they have on this roster as a whole roster, not just, I guess, just the 40-man, but in the minors and up here. But they didn't go after IDK, right? Whatever.
IKF.
Yeah, IKF.
IVF. You're not IVF.
Yeah, whatever it is. That's an outtake. No, they didn't go after him. They didn't give him the contract, so maybe they are happy with who they have, and they do like it. And we as fans want a move. You don't care who at this point, and it's the same thing from last offseason. They didn't really make any signings until the trade for Arise, or after the trade for Arise. Kind of set the dominoes in effect. So whatever he's doing behind the scenes, it's not going to happen until January, unless we get a New Year's surprise. But I think he's happy with who's on the team.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to hit the pause button here on this conversation, and we're going to continue it in tomorrow's episode because we've still got third base to talk about. I think that'll be brief. However, the outfield is very interesting. The DH situation is interesting, and obviously the starting rotation and bullpen are in flight. We're going to spend probably more time on the rotation, I would say. So make sure you join us again tomorrow to continue this conversation. Thanks for making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day. Of course, we'll be back tomorrow on Saturday the 30th of December. Myself, Peter Pratt, and Chase, the loud Miami fan. And we'll see you then.